Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us, either live or virtual, or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you're logging in from. This is the uh, roundtable panel discussion about research in the wild, sponsored by the SAM Wilderness Medicine uh, interest group. So we have a wide panel of experts here to lead us into their wild research. And for
Alrighty,
the
hello
record,
everybody.
there we go.
Stuart Harris, just convincing my computer to share its screen. And welcome Ashley Moran. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
Cool, thank you. So today we are going to be talking about different ways that research can leave the hospital and go into new locations, which is what wilderness medicine, I think, does best. I have no disclosures other than to say that there are people out in the world who are much more athletically able than I in the out of doors. So what is wilderness medicine research? I typically define it as we investigate medical and other conditions under resource limited and austere conditions. And that's a pretty wide range of areas where we can be expert. And it can be in areas as defined by the US Congress in 64 as wilderness. So that can be uh, up high or out into the developing world as just a routine course of business. A lot of things that are done across the underserved areas of the planet fall into our purview. Increasingly, and especially in the last couple of months, I've been having fairly active discussions and a lot of the leadership in both low Earth orbit and looking towards lunar and Martian exploration is being led by wilderness medicine trained people. And then I think most importantly, I think a way that we sometimes overlook our capacities is what we bring back to the hospital. So a lot of expert wilderness medicine research can be conducted right back into our own uh, emergency departments. Sometimes ask why wilderness medicine research? And it's sometimes because we're capable of getting to where other researchers are not. So we can go to places, can be comfortable, and can then work professionally under conditions that a lot of doctors and researchers just aren't trained to do. I think something else that I'm seeing as an increasing strength of wilderness medicine is the breadth of our curiosity and the fact that we aren't as bound by the increasing, not just dividing our explorations of medicine into individual organs, but then into the left superior nephron, only on that one sub segment of humanity. So the ability to have an ecological approach to see human health for what it is, as a process that's incorporated in a vast web of living creatures, and that ability to reach beyond, well, this isn't something the NIH would fund, and this isn't something the NSF would fund. So between human health and the environment, when obviously they're hugely interdigitated, and our ability to break down those silos, to think outside the cliched box, is something that we have a talent at and we should play towards. Some of the work we do and have been done at different centers across the planet are moving technologies that have been designed for inside, outside. So ultrasound is an area that when it was first being pursued, people were like, that's crazy talk. They're expensive, they're fragile. You don't have 110 power. You can't do that. And we're finding out, yes, in fact, you can. And then also what we learn outside that we can bring back. So a lot of the Germans and other work in nitric oxide inhalation for HAPE can flow back into the hospital. So there are ways that we can both reach out from the hospitals and gain from the outside and pull it back into the hospitals to move forward. The last area that I see a special place for wilderness medicine research is that intersection of climate and health. And there's been an extraordinary explosion in the last 5 to 7 years that people first are beginning to get it that human health isn't something that occurs in a hospital, that we're kind of picking up the pieces in the end when everything else has failed, and that to best advance human health, we need to be thinking about that intersection of the biosphere, the sole source of all of our health, and how we're impacting it, and especially looking towards climate justice and the fact that many of the people who have contributed least as a population to climate change are being most impacted by it. So this up in far northwestern Alaska, indigenous communities, Alaska Native communities that have been there quite peacefully for 6,000 years and successfully are being devastated by melting permafrost. The fundamental drivers of wilderness medicine research, I think, are at those extremes. So it can be extremes of climate or of environment. It can reach all the way from the high Arctic down into the rainforest of the tropical areas, and then on out into space. And something I tell fellow students and anyone who will listen, that the great news is that if you want to go somewhere that no one else wants to go because they're scared of, whether it's hypoxic stress or uh, creepy crawlies that scare you, piranha, then you can set up shop in a way that others can't. And again, using that ecological approach, I think it expands the remarkable gift that emergency medicine provides, in that we're not limited by the age of our patients, or we're not taking care of a single organ or a degree of acuity. But we're expanding to do all of that, and then to say, well, you don't just have to come to a hospital. We can take care of you where you are. And similarly, as we approach our research, looking towards those thin ends of the bell curve is something that I think we can do especially well. And so, whether it's looking out into the future in a way that medicine traditionally does not, or looking outside into environments in a way that typical hospital-based medicine doesn't, that's something important that we can provide. So, some very rapid examples just to fire the imagination. We've done a fair bit of work with the Woods Hole Research Center, now the Woodwell Climate Research Center, up in Alaska, and looking at how changes in the permafrost are impacting health. And you might say, well, I don't give a damn about that. That's a long way away, and I'm in sea level lower 48 or in Europe. Why does that matter to me? And the reason that matters to you is because there's twice as much carbon locked up right now in the permafrost as exists in the atmosphere. So twice as much. And as it warms, we're warming preferentially in the high latitudes. That carbon is being metabolized and released into the atmosphere. And these are effects that aren't currently built into most of the climate models. So if you have twice as much carbon kind of hanging out and melting, it's going to have a huge impact on sea level rise and other changes. So these are places we should be involved. Another quick example is a lot of our early work and continuing work has been looking at hypoxic stress. So how does that low oxygen state affect the organism and the organs? And then increasingly, we're looking at the organelles, these obviously mitochondria. And through that work, we've continued. So this is Brian Strickland there in the middle in the left-hand black coat, made it to Feriche there below Everest Base Camp in March, and was working. We were looking at different ways of treating HAPE. And very quickly, obviously, things turned for the worse. This is March 20th. It looks like it's dated, when things really started locking down. And so I think a lot of people thought and had experienced that, well, wilderness medicine, if you're locked inside, is not something you can do. But again, the idea that what we've done outside as a community can very much be brought back home. He was able to start up an inhaled nitric oxide study to treat COVID. And so that to see hospital walls as a permeable membrane is something that I think we it stands to greatly help the medical process to be a little more broad-minded and ecumenical. And then lastly, I think just in 20 years of doing this, what I'm seeing as maybe the primary value of research so far is the creation of a community. So we've been able across the nation and increasingly across the globe to train people who become our colleagues who are extraordinarily gifted in a wider view of what human health can be and should be. And so if we can do that and get paid to do it, it's pretty damn good work. And with that, I'll stop and say thank you to all and have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Hillary Irons, who will be carrying the reign from here. All yours, Hillary.
Thanks, Stuart.
I have stopped sharing. Should be you.
Okay. All right, so to get a little bit more into some of the nitty-gritty of research, we're going to talk about some of the benefits and challenges. So why do field research? Well, the holy grail of all research is to, of course, further knowledge and improve clinical outcomes. But more selfishly, we grow looking for solutions to our own questions and those that we find most interesting and impactful. Of course, we all want academic productivity and advancement and to mentor the next generation. And
Sorry, Hillary, can you do your presenter view? Said do a slideshow, please.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Is that better?
There we go.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, the other thing is to create your own niche. Additional benefits to field research: it's not work if you love it. If you combine your career with your passion, you might just love your job. And one effective way to combat burnout from clinical medicine is to have other aspects of your career, such as teaching or research. Another is to have sports and hobbies. And let's be honest, you're probably in this lecture because you like to be outdoors. So all research projects are going to have challenges, and most travel and wilderness trips also have moments of uncertainty. When you combine the two, you compound the problem. Getting the visa can be a challenge, especially if you need something beyond a tourist visa or getting access to certain restricted areas. And airlines often have many restrictions, including the number of bags, weight restrictions, limits on chemicals, gels and liquids, or medical supplies. Customs vary depending on the country. And then once you collect your samples, getting them home can also be another challenge. Things like plant and animal material or transporting blood, which has potential pathogens, can raise eyebrows and questions, and sometimes require quarantining or prolonged delays in receiving your samples. If getting through customs in large airports isn't enough, you have to get yourself and all your research supplies actually to the field site, and this can be an even bigger challenge. It usually requires advanced planning with several contingency plans and careful packaging for safe travel. Occasionally, a few bribes and a lot of faith. It almost always results in unanswered questions and carrying some of your essentials like your computers yourself. In the research lab, it's 70 degrees and fluorescent, but in field research, these become inadvertent additional variables that are out of your control. Contamination in research is always a problem, but it can be extra challenging to keep things clean in the wilderness. When it comes to storing your samples, there's no -20 freezer. Ice can even be hard to come by. And this can be particularly ironic when you're surrounded by glacier or permafrost. Recruiting subjects can be hard, and it's often challenging, even in the hospital, but to meet your sample size goals for various reasons. You approach people who are out enjoying their vacation time, and you want to poke and prod them and measure them, and most people don't find this enjoyable. I was once involved in a project where we enrolled people at 14,000 feet, and we collected data 2 days later at 16,000 feet, and without a way to track or call them or even tell the team ahead how many people to expect, your loss to follow-up number really can go up. Translational problems can come up as well. One research project that I think Stuart may have alluded to was involved measuring mercury levels in Siberian natives as heavy metals are released as the permafrost melts. And mercury is best measured through hair and nails, and is least contaminated in toenails, as they're protected. However, never mind convincing the IRB of the scientific merits of going to Siberia to collect the toenails of local fishermen. Try explaining that in Russian to the crusty fishermen why you want to give them a pedicure. And then, of course, there's navigational errors. Sometimes you're just lost. So just getting to the site can be a physical challenge to yourself and to your team, especially if you have to hike in yourself. It can be hot or cold, it can be buggy. And asking your research staff to be in those conditions for an extended time can be trying, and can also be hard on your subjects who might not want to take off their shirt for an ultrasound when it's below freezing, or it can expose them to the potential hypothermia. And conditions can make it hard to collect samples. For example, cold can affect your ability to draw blood due to vasoconstriction. You always have to think of extreme weather conditions and natural disasters that could happen. And in some places, political unrest or international relations can threaten previously solid agreements. It's important to consider the living conditions of where you're going to be going. Are you going to be sleeping in a -20 sleeping bag, or under mosquito nets on a barge, or in a tent with several of your not so close friends? And where do your food and water come from? Are you going to be detoxifying your own water? It's important to consider the comfort of yourself and your team, and you don't want this to become a research sufferfest. Plus, some of these factors can actually lead to true health threats, such as malaria or dehydration. And if you have a team that's miserable, ill, not sleeping, and generally uncomfortable, it can bring down the morale and impact your desire to continue and your research quality. Technology is also a lot of fun in the wilderness. In many cases, you're going to want to use something such as an ultrasound or other types of equipment that need power. And in many places, solar or wind might be the best option. It's environmentally friendly, but not always that reliable. And what if it rains or it's overcast for several days? Outlet adapters and voltage converters are important to consider. And batteries won't charge if it's very cold, and they can even overheat in the sun. And moisture is no fun to batteries either, which is pretty common outdoors. Traditional hard drives are actually only rated to about 10,000 feet. I've never actually seen one fail, but it is a potential concern. Compatibility can be a problem, especially if you're in a foreign country. Even finding a printer, copier, or computer in another country can be challenging. And then with your health data, you had to think about encryption and HIPAA compliance and trying to find a way to keep their data safe. And additional challenges in communications, obviously internet connectivity can vary depending on how far and how remote you are. Language barriers are always a problem, and time zones can add to that. Of course, everything that shouldn't get wet probably will, and waterproofing can be an issue. And there's always unforeseen challenges, things that have been forgotten or aren't functioning correctly. Things that you didn't actually think about, like vacutainers won't draw at altitude because that pressure difference is now gone. And something that works well at home often won't work once you get there. However, these seem like problems, but they actually have some great solutions, and they generally wind up with some pretty good stories, and it usually all works out. The way that we work on these things is to do your homework, plan ahead, have some patience, lots of humor, luck, improvise. Sometimes you have to have tea or even vodka with the locals, which is actually how I wound up getting some of those toenails, and having just a little bit of Zen. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Goldflam from Yale, who's going to take it from here.
Excellent. So thanks, Hillary. My name is Katya Goldflam, and I'm going to talk about a little bit more of the cut and dry components. No toenails in this portion of the lecture, unfortunately. So this is, a little bit of a discussion of just what is some of the support that's out there, how can you disseminate your research, et cetera. Now that you've done all this work, you sort of also obviously want to make sure that you reach your audience. And also, I want to just kind of go over. We have, a variety of different topics and sort of areas to study. I know Stuart has gone over a bunch of different concepts and ideas as to why things are important, but certainly just to kind of make clear exactly how broad really the area of wilderness medicine research actually can be, and that some of it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be at altitude or in some, very difficult situation. That's obviously part of the fun, but as someone who is part of the residency leadership at our institution, one of my areas, for example, is kind of the more medical education component, and certainly there's areas in wilderness medicine even in that. So just to kind of address a couple of the areas, so types of studies that are out there, right? You can talk about the physiology, how it changes in different environments, and again, this has already been alluded to in terms of predictors of HACE or HAPE, altered mental status, using the different medications and seeing what works well. Animals, bites, stings, injuries, all that sort of stuff. Again, Stuart mentioned creepy crawlies. That's kind of, I think, one of the funner areas of wilderness medicine. And certainly some of this can be about treatment. Some of it can be more epidemiology, risk factors, prevention. As my husband is convinced that everything in Australia wants to kill you. So that's why I had to put a picture of a platypus up here, which apparently is one of the most painful stings when they poke you with an ankle spur. So, that's sort of an opportunity right there. I would definitely, you could sell me on doing some research on platypuses, platypi. Evidence-based guidelines, so clinical practice guidelines, for example, if you're interested more in disaster research or disaster medicine, travel or event medicine, certain disaster scenarios, either actual disasters versus something that you're designing, that this describing the logistics, for example, is something that you can do, or actually studying at how things have turned out that have happened, where interventions have occurred and how these have functioned or not functioned. Human interactions in different environments. So Hillary and I were talking about this a couple of days ago, that certainly you're, if you're in a different surrounding, how do humans interact? And that's going to change and vary based on if you're in your ED versus if you're out in the wilderness. So if you're interested in human factors, that might be an area that you could consider. And then there's also stuff that's a lot safer, which is sitting at your computer looking at a database in Excel or whatever. So mountaineering injuries, or I know Stuart, for example, published a paper on soft tissue injuries from a Knowles database of, I think it was like 28 years of data that's out there. So, this is all sort of, especially if you're applying for a wilderness medicine fellowship, I think areas that you can consider, even in the middle of COVID where you can't study, there's a lot of different options out there in terms of what research can be incorporated. And then me personally, obviously, with my interest in medical education specifically, curriculum development and curriculum assessment is also something where you can study, and that again broadens the opportunity for publication as well, which I'll talk about. So the grants or various support mechanisms out there, certainly this is the obvious one from the Wilderness Medical Society. This is literally copied from their website. They have a couple of different grants, including some for medical students, residents, early career investigators, and then senior career investigators. And you can see that there's actually a fair amount of funding. I think there's usually one other one that wasn't listed that's a travel grant, and I don't know exactly why that wasn't on there right now. It may have just been because of COVID. But certainly if you look out there, there's a lot of ways to sort of pay for the travel, the supplies. Obviously, if you're actually going to places, then it's going to cost you, it's not a cheap thing to be doing. And so to get some sort of support is excellent. There's SAM grants, CORD grants. None of them are necessarily wilderness medicine specific, but again, that doesn't mean that you can't apply it to those settings. And also, like I said, with education grants in particular, that's another way that if you want to apply it that way, that you can sort of swing it into a wilderness direction. There's other areas that can actually get you funding. So the American Alpine Club, the Institute for Altitude Medicine, even the US Department of Defense or Office of Naval Research, for example, have grants. They actually have a huge amount of funding that if you can come up with a study that they're willing to support, that may be an amazing source to get funding for that. in terms of other just sort of more moral support, I guess, this is I don't know how long they've been doing this, but the Wilderness Medical Society has, I think it sounds like they're getting more consistent with this. This is a great opportunity also to look at, it's called Fireside Chats. It's basically a 1 hour long lecture, each of these over the course of several months. They're available online. They are for members only, so I have no disclaimers or whatever in terms of Wilderness Medical Society funding, but as this is one of the benefits of the membership, so that's really great. And they actually have a thing where you can submit ideas for talks too. So, this is sort of more of the basic how-to in terms of research. So if you're looking into buffing up your methodology and maybe even statistics background, et cetera, and making sure that what you do has sound methodology, then this is a great way to talk to and obviously network with some other wilderness medicine experts that can sort of slant a general research topic to what we're interested in. And then once you've done all the hard work, you want to make sure that you reach your audience, right? So how are you going to disseminate this? Abstracts are kind of the obvious easy one. Well, I say easy, relatively easy compared to full paper. But again, the Wilderness Medical Society accepts abstracts to be submitted or presented rather at their summer conference. SAM, ASAP, CORD, even here at SAM, there is the opportunity to present some of those, and you can convert them into didactics, for example. So a lot of different ways that you can reach your audience as well. And then lastly, if you have an actual paper, hopefully that's sort of the currency, right, that you want to get out of it in the end, other than just sort of the enjoyment of getting to go places, is in terms of writing up papers. I think there's actually a lot more journals out there than we realize. The Wilderness and Environmental Medicine one, which is the journal for the WMS Society, is the obvious one. And they have original research, case reports, even just photography, wilderness images, if that's something that you're interested in. And then they also have clinical practice guidelines that you can help contribute to, which is something that they've done over the last few years. And that's published in a supplement, so another opportunity there. Other journals, including the High Altitude in Medicine and Biology, travel medicine journals. This this is, I think, a brand new one this year. The British Journal for Expedition Medicine, I think, is brand new in 2021. So someone obviously has been going out in the world traveling, not me, unfortunately, but sort of another opportunity. And then, like I said, in terms of education opportunities, there's a bunch of medical education journals where if something that you're doing is curriculum based, or some sort of teaching methodology, then that's another opportunity to publish. So lots of opportunities out there, and just in terms of logistics, I hope that gives a bit of an overview. This was actually a paper that was published in 2018, and so I think once you have in mind kind of how you want to publish stuff or what you want to study, the topic, hopefully you just sort of have your own topic, but this paper I thought was actually really interesting because it looked specifically at, they reviewed the clinical practice guidelines and looked at relevant articles to see sort of where research was missing. And so I guess there's a fair amount of research on heat-related illnesses that has a lot of new and ongoing research, but the big gaps were eye injuries, drowning prevention, lightning injuries, wound management, and spine immobilization, which is sort of an area of controversy. So again, a lot of areas and gaps still out there. So if you're someone who has an area of passion, obviously pursue that. But if you're just kind of thinking where are there gaps that I may be able to fill, or maybe I want to come up with a project as I'm applying for fellowship or whatever, then these are certain areas where obviously there's still a fair amount of knowledge that can be gained. So lots of opportunities out there. And Henderson is going to talk about how to involve yourself and how to involve learners. So I will pass it on to you.
Great, thanks so much. So it would be great for the folks that are on the call that are not us to turn your camera on, because I would just like to see a show of hands real quick. So, okay, well, we at least have one. Let's see, Dr. Gerardo from Duke. So we have, typically when we do this in person, we like to kind of gauge who the audience is. So my part is talking about getting learners involved with research. So that's kind of a generic term, learners, right? So is that the medical students? Is that the preclinical students? Is that senior faculty? Is that junior faculty? Or that med students or residents? And really just trying to get people involved in a project and involved in research. I think for the other folks on the panel here, you've got big name hitters, you've got Grant, you've got Stewart, you've got Hillary, you've got Katya. All these folks are at big institutions, Dr. Gupta, the Sanjay Gupta. You've got all these folks who can throw out their name and all the things they've done. It's really easy for them to get people to participate and do activities because people are probably knocking on their door all the time and sending them emails all the time wanting them to do stuff. For folks that are at smaller institutions or that aren't as established in research, sometimes it's a little more difficult. But I think one of the things you want to think about when you're trying to engage a learner is, what do you need from someone to help you with a project? And what do they want out of it? Oftentimes it's pretty clear we know what the med student wants, right? They want to come in, get their name on a paper, get a publication, get into the best residency they can, go on and be the attending and take your job, right? For the junior faculty, they want to get promoted, they want to come in, they want to take your job, So for the preclinical students, they want to get into med school, same thing, right? But some people just really have an interest in learning more about something. Oftentimes it's tough to get people up to speed on a topic or up to speed on a project. Like, everyone has a different sort of background and a different approach to research, but there's some basic fundamentals that a lot of people learn and need to learn early in their career, and some people like myself are learning them later in their career. I didn't do a ton of research early on, and I've become more involved with it as I've gone through my academic career. And it's really interesting to see how, coming in as a older faculty member, when I'm getting guidance from some of our medical students and residents in how to do research. So I think one of the things to think about is, what do you want? What do you need help with? Or what kind of a project do you want to do? And who are the target audience? Who are the learners that you want to engage with? And it may not be someone junior to you, it may be someone senior to you that you are going to help with, or it may be someone junior to you that's going to help you. It may be someone that you're trying to get med students involved or your residents involved. Do you just want data collection? Do you want someone to go out and get surveys for them, filled out? Or do you want someone to go do sample collection? Do you want someone to actually do the data analytics and crunch the numbers? Do you want someone to write the bulk of the manuscript? Do you want someone to do all the lit review or search? Do you want someone to help with the grant submission? What do you really need? So I think that's part of the second part of your research proposal and your research ideas would be thinking about, what can you do for this project and what do you need help with? And looking for the folks that would have the most to contribute to you and getting the word out there. So how do you do that? Well, if you're one of the big name people on the panel, aside from me, then you can, and Dr. Gerard, you can just put your name out there and say, hey, I've got this research project. I would love to have somebody help me. And you'll get, it's like American Idol, people lining up in every city to come and be on your show and help you out, right? And so for folks who don't have that, how do you do it? Well, one of the best ways would be reach out to your emergency medicine interest groups and your wilderness medicine interest groups at your schools, because most of the time there's going to be students who are really eager to do something. Now, I've said this when we've given this talk before. I've used the analogy of a medical student is a lot like a golden retriever. And it's okay. I love golden retrievers. I have one, just like I used to be a med student, but they're so full of energy and they want to please. They want to be there and they want to do something. And so you're like, hey, but you have to give them a direction, right? You got to throw that tennis ball. You got to keep throwing the tennis ball for them. So some folks are going to come in and be super excited and not have a lot of knowledge. Some folks are going to have a lot of knowledge and not be excited, right? Like some of your colleagues who know how to do every portion of research and all the data abstraction, all the analytics, everything, but they're not going to be excited about some wilderness research project, right? So you've got to combine that enthusiasm and channel that enthusiasm into something that they can actually do. And sometimes that involves you being a mentor and helping them through the process and the project and giving them the opportunity to gain the tools and the knowledge that they can then use to help be successful in that research. And then, it may be something that pays off down the road in a second or third project for them, maybe not even with your project, but, reaching out, I think starting out, reaching out with your students at the interest group level, then your residents, because there's almost always going to be a resident who's interested in wilderness medicine or wants to do an elective or is looking for they all have to do some projects. So you can help, get the ones that are really interested in getting involved with a project. And then the other thing, if you've exhausted all your resources, you're like, man, there's nobody here who wants to help me. There's no one that can step up. Then reach out to the interest group with SAM, reach out to the interest group with ASEP, reach out to the WMS. All those groups have members who, and they have, you know, lists, serves, and emails, and different forms of communication, and put it out there and say, hey, you know, I'm interested, I need some help, I'm looking for people to do this. Then if that fails, you strike out, no one wants to come help you and hang out, then go to social media, you know, and put something up on, you know, on your Facebook, on your Twitter, or on some other, you know, platform, whatever you want, right? And, you know, Instagram, however, be like, hey, I need help doing this research project. And you'd be surprised that you'll be able to, it's a good way to recruit people. And it's also a good way to get, you know, some folks that are interested. It's probably a better way. Social media is probably a better way to recruit participants in a research study than it is to recruit people to help you, but you'd be surprised the number of folks that you can get engaged that way. So I think, kind of wrapping it up real quick, thinking about what do you need from the learner, and who, you know, what skills do you need from them, and what are you going to give them in return, and how can you work together to have a successful project. And so this is really just a super quick thing. I'll put my email in the chat if anyone has any questions or needs some help getting things started or wants to collaborate with something, just reach out to me. And up next, we have Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who's going to dazzle you all.
Can I just say, Evan, I don't think being a golden is a bad thing at all. I think it's purely just kind of a recognition of what the dynamic is and how we can best sort of quote unquote use you / train you, and vice versa, right? I mean, we get, like, in real life, you get a lot from having a golden retriever, and vice versa. If you have, you know, a medical student that has that enthusiasm, I don't think that's intended as like, don't be that way or whatever. But I do fully appreciate you asking in terms of sort of what the best setup is. And I think that the advice given there was excellent. So.
Apologize. Yeah, that was not at all meant to be, you know, insulting or derogatory. I love golden retrievers, and it's just I love that enthusiasm and energy. And a lot of students come in with that energy, and then medical school beats it out of them. And so, you know, that's one of the benefits of wilderness medicine and emergency medicine, is that we give you the opportunity to shine and be excited about showing up to work every day. I mean, all of us on this call or on the panel show up every day for our shifts ready to go. Some days a little more ready to go than others, but we show up ready to go and waiting for somebody to throw the ball for us, because that's what we do every day, you know, day in and day out. And so having that enthusiasm and that desire is going to carry you far, and then you'll get the skills over time.
All right. Well, when we get started, I always end up with what I consider the really boring part of this talk, but I'm pretty boring these days. I don't actually do any wilderness research anymore. I will preface that. I do a lot of hospital-based operations research and all these sort of things, being a department chair, but you know, I still participate very actively in wilderness education. So I think one of the things that we always talk about, and this might be directed toward more of the students who are here who are interested in potential you know, faculty type work in the future, those of us who are faculty who are thinking about our advancement, you know, in our medical schools, and, you know, how do we parlay all these things that we've been talking about today, about research, about publications, into our promotions. And I'll tell you, this is a really excellent group here, even our speaker panel and our moderator. We run the gamut here of professor, associate professor, assistant professor in this group. So, you know, if there's specific questions, we all could have, you know, different sort of input. I actually am just going through the promotions process myself. I'm up for promotions next month, so to professor. So we'll see if that works out. So no disclosures here. So when we talk about promotions pathway, one thing that is pretty universal is that every med school is different. Every institution is a little different on what they focus on. You know, often there are different tracks. There might be a, you know, something called a clinical track. There might be a research track. There might be a track with tenure or non-tenure. It's all different everywhere. But one universal theme that you'll see is that there's basically some combination of the things up here. So you as a person, you as an academic, it's going to be some sort of combination of, you know, research and you providing education and you being a clinician and you providing service outside of these things. So service can be defined by a lot of different avenues, whether that is hospital-based committees, whether that is committees and leadership in professional societies. You know, this is often defined by your local culture of your medical school, even just service to your medical school functions as well. So these are the sort of things that, you know, before you start thinking about embarking on wilderness research and kind of education and scholarship, you really should take a kind of look at what every stage is going to demand. So when we think about advancement, and this is kind of pretty standard, you know, often you start as an instructor level or an assistant professor, then associate, and then professor. And usually this requires some sort of, you know, reputation and the advancement of your reputation in these areas. So you kind of local, regional, national, international, and you'll see this. I went online and took a look at a bunch of different kind of medical schools and their requirements, and it's kind of pretty universal, kind of the things that you need and that advancement from a local reputation to a national. So local reputation is just what it sounds like, you know, within your institution, within your medical school, within your fellowship, and then regionally, you know, that's defined differently, your state, kind of your part of the country, you know, your local network, and the national and international are pretty self-explanatory. So let's talk about wilderness medicine in promotions a little bit. I remember being a pretty junior faculty with New York Presbyterian in about 2009 in Queens, New York. And if any of you guys have ever been to Flushing, Queens, it is arguably the most urban, most diverse place in the country, and sometimes arguably the world. I remember once I walked through our ED and we counted 52 different languages spoken in that department with just our patients on that day. I remember going to my chairperson and going, "Wilderness is an academic gold mine." She just stared at me and goes, "What is wrong with you?" But it really is in a lot of respect for really considering the discussion that you've already heard today. There's so much opportunity because wilderness really combines so many different aspects, right? In hospital care, you think about it as a mindset of resource limited medicine, but also resource limited research. So this could be in a different environment with different patient populations, and you know the touch points of what kind of defines wilderness medicine. I mean, you have this whole gamut, right? You have this gamut of, you know, pre-hospital care, of disaster medicine, of toxicology, of, you know, veterinary medicine, if you want to go down that road with the poisonous platypus, and, you know, kind of this whole circle, and I could keep going. And that's what allows you to have a lot of flexibility and a broad approach in terms of wilderness research. So when you think about publications, and Dr. Goldflam had mentioned some specifically, but when I think about wilderness, this is great. You know, I do operations research. There's only so many journals I could publish in, but I'm doing wilderness research. I got all this, right? I got tactical, I got emergency medicine, I got altitude, I got medical education. What do? We do it in situ simulation-based education, you know, in situ or, you know, in vivo or in vitro. It all depends. There's so many things. We even have our own journal with the Wilderness and Environmental Medicine Journal, you know, as part of the WMS. But there's all of these places for you to take that good work that you're going to be doing and publish. Because if you remember back to promotions, research is a part of most promotional tracks in some respect. You know, when I think about grants, you know, we had mentioned grants before. I'm not going to get that far into it, but no, even grants. I mean, there's specific grants at WMS just for wilderness research, and it's pretty amazing. But now when you look at SAEM Foundation, they have grants. I mean, grants are due soon, so you guys should get started. But Emergency Medicine Foundation has a ton of grants, National Science Foundation. So there's a lot out there. It's a matter of sometimes going and searching. And I think I remember Dr. Harris mentioned being creative in your grant proposals. But, you know, I think if grant funding, which can be a part of promotions, there is availability. And I'll tell you a quick story. I'm affiliated with the Zucker School of Medicine and Hofstra University, which is on Long Island near New York City. And I have a friend who's a biology professor, and he needed funding in order to basically get tenure. Guess where he got his funding from? It was from the Wilderness Medical Society. because he is a marine biologist and he was looking at toxins with horseshoe crabs, but he actually received a grant from there. So this grant funding, you can be creative and you can get funding in places, but the funding might be requisite. So we talk about education, and you think about the path that you might have to take in terms, educationally to get promoted. And, it's, there's so many different, this is barely, this is the tip of the iceberg. But if you think about it locally, listen, if you build it, they will come. I've found that with wilderness. In the past 10 years, I've been affiliated with 3 different residency programs. Not calling the residents kids, but the kids love it. The med students love it. So, just the idea of building in a curriculum, building in a track into the residency, even developing an elective. I mean, these are all things that at your local level that you're just going to take your passion and you're going to do. And in all honesty, in building this stuff, you can start thinking about doing ed research with wilderness medicine at a small scale. But, as you kind of develop that, grand rounds and, kind of conference development, being just a conference lecturer and, start developing a teaching pod. This is something that Dr. McGinnis had talked about in some past talks about fellowship teaching pod in his local region, something they developed during the pandemic to support education. But, I would just suggest with grand rounds, don't be shy. If you have a network of people that just go, hey, you have any need for a grand round speaker? I got these great, interesting, and unique talks, because very few people talk about topics that are related to wilderness medicine. Truth. And in the Zoom world, and hopefully we're not stuck here, but some benefit of this is that I can give a Zoom grand rounds to a lot of people without ever having to leave my house, which has some benefits. And so national, this is where you want to advance, being an invited faculty, a course developer, an invited lecturer, but also do not discount the power of foam education at this point, because there are several medical schools that are taking foam education as a means for advancement. So listen, if you like the podcast, if you like blogging, if you like Twitter, none of this stuff I do. So I'm not going to speak on it very much, but if you can do that and catalog downloads, if you can catalog your clicks and exposures, this is all academic value for promotions. In some med schools, this is why you have to go and you have to really determine if that's a pathway that is used. And just clinical. So we think about clinical and wilderness medicine, and this might be what some people consider the toughest, but I don't think so. So I think about, providing, the provision of providing healthcare in a resource limited environment. That is basically going to be anywhere outside of a hospital. So like the local, that's a picture of, people supporting the New York City Marathon, which my med school, we always have a tent somewhere. And guess what? Your volunteers end up being, sometimes a whole class from like a podiatry school or sometimes a physical therapy program. So that's great that you have 30 volunteers from a PT program. So it might be good to have a wilderness doc out there, helping runners going by. But, sometimes regionally, and actually we have Grant Lippman on here, who's an expert at this, but providing some aid stations or first aid for, endurance events. And, that is something that could be regional, national, it could be international, but that stuff is fun. Your expertise is certainly needed. Kind of your national, international, we're not all going to go to Everest ER and provide that work, but there's no real limitation to providing, kind of national, international type of NGO work or other support work, where you can call yourself a true expert in remote and resource limited medicine. A little trouble right now with this pandemic going around, but hopefully when that's done, we'll have a little bit more open access to this. So when you think about this, and administrative, I didn't want to forget about this, but administrative is like the last part, but this is important as well. So this is kind of the service component in some respects. and you think about what you could do. Even last night, before I jumped on the Didactic, I was on with my med school's interest group. And so now I'm the new wilderness medicine liaison for the Wilderness Medicine Club. So just by being on, but you get to do these kind of local things administratively, which shows some service. Regionally, your regional professional society memberships, volunteerism, EMS. But nationally, I think it was mentioned in the chat a bunch of times, join the WMS, join SAM interest group, join the wilderness section and ASAP. And this is your pathway to not only growing your network, but providing service and a pathway to leadership. And then, I think, lastly, at the national level, there's an opportunity for mentorship. So this is a research talk. So I'll tell you, in the past year, I have actually been a research mentor for 2 people that I don't know. One of them is a PhD student from North Carolina. The other one is, need a little help about doing national parks type research on an established database. But I feel like it's a responsibility of being at this level to provide that sort of research mentorship. So it was a couple quick calls and Zooms, and it's actually worked out pretty well. So we are out of time, and I'm done anyway. So these are thank you again for attending this talk, and I hope you guys gain some value out of the items that we talked about.
Well, thank you to all the panel for those super valuable insights and experiences and overview. I think you did a great job covering the entire gamut from how to get involved to research opportunities out there. So one of the 2 of the questions and things that I think we all hear a lot of is, and you touched on, how do you get involved? And it starts by showing up. SAM as an interest group, there's Wilderness Medical Society, ACEP. These all accept residents and medical students most likely can show up. Certainly, even if you're out of residency and you're attending, you show up, you raise your hand, someone sends out an email, just blanket everybody and say you want to get involved. And I think every one of us would agree that any interest in any sort of research shows you have a critical eye, then you can take that perspective and apply it to any other ecosystem you want to. So get involved, ask questions, volunteer, make a nuisance of yourself. No one's ever going to be bothered by someone's enthusiasm. In fact, we love all type of dog breeds, to not go too deep in the puns in the chat room, but we love enthusiasms. We're even cat people, we don't judge. So get involved, show up, and please don't hesitate to contact any of us because we love enthusiasm. Any other last closing thoughts from the panel?
I'd just say that, especially in wilderness medicine, I think too much in getting into med school, and then once you're there, research is just seen as this onerous, god-awful, checkbox. And if you look at it as, the same things that bring us into wilderness medicine, it's generally a sense of exploration and of seeing what's over the next hill and, wow, can I find something new in the world? And so if you approach research with kind of that mindset, it's just a hell of a lot more fun and more interesting. And you're just trying to, poke out what can we figure out here, the same way you would if you were on a climbing route or on a river or something else. So your mindset can make a big difference, and enthusiasm is never, ever a criticism. Hold on to it.
Stuart, I would agree with that. I went into it thinking, hey, the research is not something I want to do. I'm not interested. But once I started looking at things that I was interested in and had questions about, said, hey, I wonder if this line's going to work. I wonder if this is going to work. And really taking that more of an exploratory sense of it, it really became something I was interested in, and I've started to get involved in. Please, no one take offense at my comments. The enthusiasm is really something that we really encourage, and all of us have. That's why everyone involved is here, really trying to push forward the specialty of wilderness medicine research, because for the longest time, we've sort of lagged and had really some suboptimal sort of research designs and a lot of surveys and not as much real, true, hard sciencey research. But a lot of the other folks on here have done some really good, solid science research. And I think elevating the level of research that we do in wilderness medicine is going to be important. And that's really what the next calling is for us.
Fantastic. Well, I think a bunch of us have other panels to go to and other things, but thank you all for your time and listening, and hope to hear from everyone soon.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
all. Thanks so much.
Bye.